All right, it is 11:01, so we will go ahead and get started. So again, welcome everyone. This webinar is going to be about 1 hour long. If you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will get to them at the end with the Q&A session. And this webinar will be recorded, and so if you miss anything, if you have to drop off early, you will receive a recording as well as the slides afterwards. All right, so just for some introductions, my name is Asia Porter. I'm the King Child Health Fellow here at TJC, and so I work directly with kids to get them insured as well as help to resolve some of their EPSDT denials that we will talk about later today. Jane?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jane DeMoby, and I'm an attorney and a legal fellow through the Equal Justice Works Fellowship. I work across our health equity groups on children's health, immigrant and refugee health, as well as independence for people with disabilities and older adults.
Amazing. All right, so for today's agenda, we are going to start just overviewing the eligibility categories for kids. We're going to talk about the eligibility requirements, the enrollment process to get onto TennCare, and then we're going to move into talking about EPSDT. So we're just going to kind of give a brief EPSDT 101. What is it? What does it cover? And then Jane is going to talk about EPSDT appeals and go over your appeal rights, how to appeal, procedural requirements, and she has some practice scenarios for you as well. All right, so first up, coverage options for kids. So there are essentially three categories of eligibility requirements. There are residency and citizenship requirements, there are financial requirements, and non-financial requirements. So that first group of requirements are mandatory. They're going to apply to every child category of eligibility that we discussed today. So every child in Tennessee, every child applying for TennCare must be a Tennessee resident, a qualified citizen or non-citizen, and have a social security number. The only exception is for a child under the age of 1. So when they're first born, they don't have to have a social, and then TennCare, once they turn 1, will ask them to provide their social security number. Qualified non-citizens are typically what you might hear referred to as LPRs. That just stands for a lawful permanent resident that has had that status for at least 5 years. So LPRs may be refugees, asylum seekers, things like that. As for financial and non-financial requirements, this slide displays examples of requirements that might apply to different categories of eligibility, but not every category will have each of those requirements. So not every category has poverty limits or spend down limits or resource limits. Finally, I want to note that with the federal poverty limits, there is a 5% disregard that will be applied if it would make an applicant eligible for that category. So for example, if a category has a 133% federal poverty level limit, a household could actually earn up to 138% and still qualify. I didn't include the 5% disregard in these slides just so they would match what you'll see in the TennCare policy manual, but just keep in mind that there really is that additional 5% tacked onto each of these categories. All right, so this table outlines just all of the categories that I'm going to cover today. As you can see, there's a wide range of income thresholds that a household could be at to qualify. And so the really big thing that we want to drive home is that oftentimes kids are eligible. It's just a matter of figuring out what they're eligible for. All right, and then this EPSDT box, that's obviously what we're here for today. This is a really important benefit that we're going to talk more about. But as you can see, most of the child categories, with the exception of CoverKids, do provide that EPSDT benefit, and that's really important. We'll explain a little bit more why later. All right, so first up, we're going to talk about Magi 0 to 19. So Magi 0 to 19, this is probably the most straightforward eligibility category. So when assessing a child for this category, Assuming that they meet all of the residency and citizenship requirements, the only thing that you'll need to verify is the child's age and the household gross income. So on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a table that breaks down a child's age and the corresponding income limit. So again, remember there is that additional 5% tacked on to those limits. So it's really 200%, 147%, and 138%. As you can see, as a child gets older, the income limit gets progressively more strict. So sometimes we have to utilize other categories to keep older children covered, but we'll get to what those other categories are later. And with TennCare Magi, a child can have private insurance. TennCare will just be the secondary payer. So that means that the provider is going to bill the child's other insurance plan first, and then TennCare will pick up whatever it does not cover. So just to review, TennCare Magi is for kids up to age 19 who are at or below 133 to 195% of poverty. There is no resource test. They can have other insurance. TennCare will just be the secondary payer. They may be eligible for retroactive coverage, and they are protected by EPSDT. All right, next we have child medically needy. So you may hear this category referred to as child medically needy spend down. It's the same thing. This category is different from other categories though, in that it goes up to age 21, whereas the other categories are going to cut off once that child turns 19. So there are no straightforward poverty limits. Instead, this is going to be a good option for families who are over income for other eligibility categories, but have a lot of medical expenses. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the spend down and resource limits that correspond to various household sizes. And so again, as household size increases, so do the spend down and resource limits. And as with TennCare Magi, kids are permitted to be on another insurance plan. TennCare, again, will just be that secondary payer. So diving more into these resource and spend down limits, what is a resource? So a resource could be anything such as, a checking account, a savings account, retirement accounts, vehicles. And with retirement accounts, not all retirement accounts count as a resource. So for example, if your retirement account is tied to your employment and you can't access your retirement account because you're an employee there, that would not count. But things like IRAs, things that aren't as tied to your employment, those could count. So with a resource limit, they're essentially just asking you to add up all of those resources that you have and see if they fall below the 2,000, 3,000, et cetera, limit that they propose. In addition to a resource limit, this category also has a spend down limit. And so a spend down limit is the amount of net income a family can have after certain deductions. So TennCare will deduct $90 from the household income. This is a standard work deduction. And then on top of that, there are also additional deductions that could apply. So for example, if it's a household where income really fluctuates, there could be a $45 irregular work deduction. And so once all of those deductions are applied, TennCare will check again if the household income is below the spend down limit. If it's not, then the household is going to have to reduce their income through a process known as spend down. So for the spend down process, applicants must submit proof of any qualifying expenses they have incurred or made payments on in the month of application or 3 months prior. So that's a total of 4 months worth of expenses. Qualifying expenses can include insurance premiums, medical bills that a family paid for out of pocket, unpaid medical bills, and dependent care expenses up to $200. TennCare will look at all of these expenses to reduce household income. And if after all these expenses are applied, a household has sufficiently brought down its income, TennCare will say that spend down has been met and the child qualifies for insurance. What's really important to note here is that you're not limited to just the child's medical expenses. Anybody in the household, if they have medical debt, if they have private insurance premiums, any of those will count. It's not just the child that you're trying to get insured. So let's say that you're working with a family of four, a mom and dad and two kids. Let's say dad had heart surgery last month and you have a $5,000 medical bill. That bill can be used to get the child onto TennCare. All right, so just to review, medically needy spend down goes up to age 21. There's no set income limit. Instead, you have resource tests and spend down limits. You can have access to other insurance. The TennCare will just be a secondary payer. There's no retroactive coverage with this category, and this does have that EPSDT benefit. All right, next we're going to cover TennCare Standard uninsured. So this category is going to be for children who were previously on TennCare but are losing eligibility. This could be due to things like a change in household income, a reduction in household size. Regardless of what the circumstances may be, the child previously had TennCare Magi and now they're losing it. If this child is below 211% of poverty, again, there's that 5% disregard, so it's really 216. So if the child is below 211% of poverty and they do not have access to insurance, TennCare will transition them onto what's called TennCare Standard uninsured. So this question of access to insurance sometimes gets tricky. What that means is that the child could not at all get insurance through their parent's employer. So what would be considered having access is if the parent job offers employer-based insurance, but they just chose not to enroll in it. That would be considered access. Even if the premiums are really expensive, that would still be considered access. So the parent cannot be offered employer-based insurance at all in order to qualify for this category. All right, so this category does carry copays. And so these numbers can look different. It depends on your household income, how high your copay is. But for primary care, like preventative care, it's important to note that there are no copays at all. So if you're just getting your annual checkup, if you're getting vaccinations, things like that, there's no copay. Things like prescriptions, depending on whether or not they're generic or name brand, can change how much the copay costs. And then things such as emergency department visits, if you get admitted to the ER, there may be no copay. If you don't get admitted to the ER, there will be a copay. So it gets tricky with the copays because it really does depend on the circumstances surrounding the care that you're receiving, but this is still a pretty good option for families with kids who are pretty healthy. I know sometimes parents who have kids with higher medical needs, sometimes they get nervous about those copays, but it's still definitely cheaper than not having insurance at all. All right, again, to review, so TennCare Standard uninsured is going to be for kids up to age 19. They are going to be at or below 211% of poverty. There is no resource test. They cannot be on other insurance, and they also cannot have access to other insurance. And this category is also protected by EPSDT. All right, TennCare Standard medically eligible. So similarly to TennCare Standard uninsured, this is going to be a category for kids who are rolling off of TennCare and do not have access to other insurance. The difference is that these kids' households' incomes are above 211% of poverty. The caveat to this, however, is that the child must have a qualifying medical condition. So this is a list, and I want to really highlight that this is not an exhaustive list, but TennCare formerly used this list as medical conditions that made people uninsurable through private insurance. And so if a child's condition is on this list, there is a good chance that they would meet the requirements for TennCare standard medically eligible. So some of the things that are on this list that I typically see are cystic fibrosis, Crohn's disease, hydrocephalus, and quadriplegia. So those are on that list, and that would make a kid eligible. But if a child's condition is not on this list, that does not mean that they don't meet the criteria for TennCare standard. You might just have to, provide some additional documentation. So the process of getting onto TennCare standard medically eligible is that when a child is being disenrolled from TennCare Magi, if TennCare determines that that child meets the technical eligibility requirements, but not the financial eligibility requirements for TennCare standard, so that is that TennCare acknowledges this child's rolling off of TennCare and they do not have access to other insurance. Those are the technical requirements, but they are above 211% of poverty. If that is the case, TennCare will send a medical eligibility packet that the family must complete and return along with medical records within 60 days. If TennCare is already aware that a child has a qualifying medical condition, it's possible that the family may not receive the packet at all. I have seen that. And so TennCare may just automatically put them onto TennCare standard medically eligible. So sometimes clients get nervous when they see that they haven't gotten a packet in a few weeks. That may not be a bad thing. All right, so again, to review, this is a category for kids up to age 19. There is no income limit. In fact, this is for kids who are above 211% of poverty. There's no resource test. They cannot have access to other insurance, and this is protected by EPSDT. All right, and then finally, this category is not protected by EPSDT, but we still think it's a good coverage option for kids, and so we still want to go through it. It's CoverKids, which is Tennessee's CHIP program. So this is a great option for families who can't meet the strict income limits to qualify for TennCare. The eligibility requirements for CoverKids are the same as TennCare Magi. So you must be a citizen, you must be a Tennessee resident, must have a social. The only difference is that the income limit goes up to 250% of poverty. Now with this, kids can have access to insurance, they just cannot be on it. So a parent's job could offer them insurance, but they can just simply say, oh no, I don't want it. I've even seen parents find out that their kids qualify for CoverKids and choose to disenroll their kids from the private insurance plan. That's perfectly acceptable. They just can't have both. And yeah. So this category, like TennCare standard, does have co-pays, and there are the different levels. So level 1, level 2, and level 3. If you fall into level 3, you don't have co-pays at all. Again, this is based off of your household income. But again, we want to highlight that there are no co-pays for preventative care. So again, this is going to be a great option for kids who do not have complex medical needs and just need basic routine care. All right, and to review, this is CoverKids is Tennessee's CHIP program. It's for kids at or below 250% of poverty. There's no resource test. They cannot be on other insurance. However, they can have access to the insurance. There's no retroactive coverage, and this is not covered by EPSDT. All right, so getting into EPSDT. So in the I want to briefly kind of contextualize the history of EPSDT because it might help to make sense, why certain things are offered. So in the early 1960s, the United States was in the middle of the Vietnam War. And at the same time, there was an increase in the number of unemployed youth. And there was evidence that a lot of these youth did not qualify for military service. So in response to seeing this data, then President John F. Kennedy wanted to understand why this was. And so he commissioned a task force on manpower planning. The following year, in 1964, this task force published a report called the 1/3 of a Nation report. And this was a report on young men found unqualified for military service. And this report found that 1/3 of the men turning 18 would not qualify for military service. And the reason for these rejections were largely due to medical issues. And so through studying government data and military rejectee questionnaires, the task force found widespread disabilities among military draftees. And in light of these findings, the task force recommended that the president establish a program to provide necessary education, training, health, and rehabilitation, and other necessary services that would enable them to be effective and self-supporting citizens. So in 1967, not too long after Medicaid was enacted, Congress implemented EPSDT because it was believed that many of the disabilities highlighted in the 1/3 of a Nation report could have been mitigated if they had been caught and treated early. Thus, the goal of EPSDT, at least at the time of its enactment, was to provide children with the comprehensive care needed to prevent or treat potentially disabling conditions as early as possible. And so knowing that, it kind of helps to make what EPSDT is and what it stands for make a little bit more sense. So EPSDT stands for Early Periodic Screening, Diagnostic, and Treatment. And so early just means that we want to assess and identify problems early. And we're going to do this through periodic check-ins. So these are the well visits, the annual PCP visits, where we're just checking, engaging children's health to make sure that they are meeting the age-appropriate benchmarks. Screening, we're going to provide kids with physical, mental, developmental, dental, hearing, vision screenings, behavioral, et cetera, to detect any problems that may be there. And if we do identify problems, that brings us to that diagnostic piece. We're going to perform diagnostic tests to follow up if we identified a risk at this in these screenings. And then finally, that brings us to treatment. We're going to provide physical, mental, developmental, dental, hearing, vision screenings to treat detected problems. So periodic medical screenings. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the well baby and well child visit schedule. And so this TennCare beneficiaries will actually get a letter in the mail with this written out, essentially saying that this is when you should take your child to the doctor. And so with EPSDT, it includes diagnosis tests and treatments for defects in vision, including glasses, hearing, including hearing aids, and relief of dental pain, infections, and restoration of teeth. It also includes developmental and behavioral screenings, mental health therapies, lead screening. So it's an incredibly comprehensive benefit, and presuming that the service is deemed medically necessary, kids can get a lot of treatment through this benefit. So the problem is that as comprehensive as this benefit is, there is not there's an underutilization of it. And so CMS put out performance targets where they essentially wanted to see that 80% of beneficiaries, so 80% of kids on Medicaid, were receiving the age-appropriate screenings. And what they found is that that was not the case. So you'll see this map on your screen. Most of the country falls into that light blue bucket, the 50 to 59%. Tennessee included falls in that bucket. So what that's saying is that only about half of the kids on TennCare are actually receiving their appropriate well child screenings. And so about 50% of kids are falling through the cracks. And these are kids who are already on TennCare. This isn't even kids that we need to do outreach to get them insured. These are kids who have insurance and they're just not getting the appropriate services that are covered under the insurance plan. And so the chart on your screen, again, what this on the line graph on the left is an age breakdown. And so what you'll see is that as kids get older, we're essentially losing them. So that dotted right red bright red line is 80%, which again is that CMS target ratio. And you'll see that as a kid gets older, we're dropping as low as to about 22%. And so this means that kids aren't seeing the doctor for whatever reason. We know that in rural areas, it's tricky to get kids to the doctor, get kids to providers. And this is another reason why advocates often push for school-based services to hopefully catch those kids who may not be seeing a primary care provider in their area. We can at least catch them at school and make sure they're getting the services that they need. All right, so Jane, I'm going to pass it off to you to talk about EPSDT appeals.
Thank you, Asia. And I know we have 2 questions in the Q&A box related to some stuff that you presented on, so maybe we can answer those as well. So I'm going to be talking about EPSDT appeals. In this context, we're talking about medical services appeals after TennCare takes some kind of action, and we'll discuss what types of actions I'm talking about. So just like Asia explained, EPSDT means that under EPSDT, TennCare members under 21 are entitled to any treatment or procedure that is necessary to correct or ameliorate physical, mental illnesses or conditions. It is a very comprehensive benefit, again, and it's something that all TennCare members do have access to. So if you're in a situation where you're not getting care that is necessary, is medically necessary, you have the right to file an appeal. Every state is required to have a notice and appeal procedure after taking some kind of action towards medical services, and we're going to kind of walk through what that looks like. So filing an appeal means going through the TennCare medical appeal form. But you can do that in a couple of ways. If you prefer to file an appeal by phone with a TennCare representative to assist you, you can do that. You can call the number that is on my slide for free and appeal over the phone. So you'll get a walkthrough. You'll walk through the questions that I'll go over in a few minutes. And you'll walk through those questions with a representative over the phone. And the only thing to note about filing an appeal over the phone is that you won't immediately get a copy of the appeal that you've filed like you would with the other methods. Eventually, you can always get that information, but it's not going to be immediately available to you. TennCare is going to have that on their end. If you file an appeal by mail, you'll complete the appeal form in writing and then mail it to TennCare at the address here. And same thing if you use fax to file the appeal, you'll fax it for free to TennCare at the number on my screen. All of these methods are just to your preference, equally available to everyone. It's just kind of what works for you. So the first part of the appeal is straightforward questions about the person that is receiving the services. So you'll share some identifying information, standard things like your name, social security, address, etc. And then you can also identify if you have a language access requirement. If you have a language other than English, you can identify Spanish or other. You can also, because EPSDT is typically for children under 21, there's usually someone who's working on behalf of the child. So it's completely okay for you to initiate the appeal on behalf of the person who's actually receiving the services. You just have to identify that. So you could be the parent, you could be a friend, a relative, an advocate or attorney, or it can even be a healthcare provider. Once you provide that information and identify who you are as the assisting person under TennCare, you'll then have kind of some supplemental forms to say that you're authorized to receive information on this person's behalf and talk to TennCare on this person's behalf. So just, be aware that as the assisting person, if you're not the person who's actually receiving services, there's going to be some additional steps that you have to take to make sure that you can fully help this person and fully work with TennCare. There's also going to be there are also going to be some questions about what type of issue you're facing. A lot of times we are working with clients who are in need of a certain healthcare service or medicine, and these are the types of questions that you can expect to answer. They are fairly detailed just because you're trying to present as much information as possible to TennCare on the front end, but also to some extent straightforward, because at that point that you're at when you're filing the appeal, you should have this level of information about whatever the medical procedure is, or the prescription or treatment or anything like that. So this is kind of the level of detail that you can expect if you're going through the appeal process. And then you'll have a space to explain exactly what TennCare got wrong in a certain situation. So a lot of times, because EPSDT is granting you coverage for medically necessary treatments, if it's denied, it's because TennCare disagrees that something is medically necessary. You'll have an opportunity to explain why this treatment is medically necessary in this particular instance for the overall care of the child that is enrolled in TennCare. So you'll have an opportunity to explain and also to send supporting documentation or any other proof that this service is medically necessary. And then there are also emergency situations. So the overall timeline for an appeal is 90 days. The appeal should be decided within 90 days from the date of the appeal. And in a lot of cases that's too long. So if you're in an emergency situation, there are additional steps you can take to file what's called an expedited appeal, which it says on the form, you'll have about a week to go through the process. So if there is an emergency situation that can't wait 90 days, there is an alternative pathway to appeal in that situation. So, like I said, an appeal would be triggered by the TennCare, the state TennCare, or the MCO, and an MCO being Blue Care, United, WellPoint, whatever provider or managed care organization you're working with to get your healthcare needs met. So if the MCO or TennCare takes an action, that means they've denied, they've terminated, they've suspended, they've reduced, they've delayed a requested treatment or service. So keep that in mind. If any kind of action like that is taken, that's the world we're in, where you'll most likely be, the next step will most likely be to appeal. So the first thing we should talk about is a notice. Any action that is taken has to be accompanied by a written notice and of your right to a hearing, including instructions on how to request a hearing. So here's what you're looking for. A notice will have a statement of what is going to happen, the specific reasons for this decision by TennCare or again by the MCO, and the legal authority for that. And then they'll also have an explanation of your hearing rights, your right to representation, and continued benefits. This is really important because oftentimes when when an action's been taken and care has been denied or suspended or any of these situations, the notice is all a family has to understand why that's happened and what to do next. So the notice having all this required information is essential to be informed as to what next steps to take. Very important to note the continued benefits language. So at times when if you're receiving care and you get a notice that says that care will be terminated on a certain date, if you appeal, you will have a right to continuation of benefits and to continue receiving benefits while the appeal is pending. So all of that needs to be outlined so families understand how to take next steps in whatever situation that they're in. So you're entitled to a hearing before a TennCare administrative judge, and this is essential. You'll have a chance to present your case to an impartial third party, an impartial decision maker. You can actually present evidence again about what the conditions the person is facing might be, any kind of supporting medical information, financial information, whatever you think might be relevant in the case, you can present that evidence. You can also have witnesses that can speak to, again, the medical condition and for what's typically the case, the consequences if this care is terminated. So you have the chance to offer witnesses and evidence in the appeal. Also, during the appeal, you can have representation. This does not have to be legal counsel. It can be a friend or relative, anybody who can speak for the person who is enrolled in TennCare, and can, again, just speak on their behalf and present the evidence and witnesses that we've discussed. You also have a right to examine the case file. So this is at the point of termination, TennCare has certain documents that they review to determine your eligibility, just like Asia explained earlier. In that case, you're entitled to review all of that information prior to the hearing as well. So this is all, when it gets to the hearing stage, you'll have an opportunity to present your information and review the information on the other side. So like I mentioned earlier, getting continued coverage of services while you're waiting for a hearing decision is essential for many families. That's something to be aware of. So if you appeal, for example, a termination, TennCare will not terminate those TennCare is not supposed to terminate those services until the hearing decision has been made, as long as you have that continuation of benefits. And then even when the hearing decision has been made, you can appeal that decision to a higher court. So the TennCare hearing stage is the first, TennCare hearing is the first stage of the appeal. And in some cases, you can appeal that decision as well. I also want to mention that different MCOs, again, if it's United, Blue Care, WellPoint, different MCOs have their what are called grievance and appeal processes. So these are slightly different from the TennCare appeal. It's an internal process. It's not technically an appeal. It's more just stating what issue you have with what dispute you have with a decision, and that you can work with the MCO on I wouldn't say an informal basis, but it's just different from the official TennCare appeal that I was just discussing. So this is important to know because sometimes you might be required to go through that process before you can even appeal, but just keep that in mind that there are some situations where you might have two different paths to go down. Similar to the TennCare appeal, an MCO process has requirements for a notice, for reasoning, for procedures to the appeal, and options to continue your benefits so that there's no interruption in coverage. Because ultimately, in cases where that would be disastrous, we want to avoid an interruption in essential medical care. So I just wanted to go through a couple of example scenarios just to kind of put together everything I was just explaining. When an appeal an appeal becomes an option in cases often where the provider and the state disagree about whether a service is medically necessary for a particular child. Ultimately, the decision is in the hands of the MCO or TennCare in this case, and they'll make a decision based on the individual child. That's when you can appeal and then follow the fair hearing procedures. So this is one example. In this example, Johnny needs a wheelchair. His MCO, let's say United, says he can get one. They send him to an in-network medical provider, but the provider says Johnny's chair won't be ready for 9 months. But here's the thing. If he stays in his current chair, he'll be developing pressure sores, and his mother's worried that he'll fall out of his old chair and break a limb. What should he do? This is a perfect situation where an appeal is relevant. So saying that the chair won't be ready for 9 months, that's a delay in the care that Johnny needs. In this case, it's medically necessary for Johnny to get the new wheelchair earlier because it would maintain his current condition. If he does not get a wheelchair soon, his condition is going to worsen because he's going to develop these pressure sores, and potentially could break a limb. So again, going back to EPSDT's mission, the goal is to correct or ameliorate conditions. So to correct or ameliorate conditions. And so we want to make sure that we're not, the TennCare or United or any of those MCOs aren't making decisions that will worsen the health condition of a child. So this is a perfect scenario where, sure, the chair was approved, but it won't be ready for 9 months. That delay would be disastrous for Johnny. And that's enough to file an appeal and pursue getting the wheelchair earlier. So slightly different scenario, Mary needs speech therapy. So this is a child who is starting school, and within the school system, she's told, or the family's told, that for her to maintain her educational benefits, she only needs speech therapy once a month. Her teacher, who's been working with her, knows that without more intense speech therapy, Mary will regress. Once again, we're in a situation where there is a benefit being provided, but it's limited, only once a month. But what is medically necessary, according to the person who is working most closely with this child, is that they need more intense speech therapy if they want to maintain the progress that they've made so far in the speech therapy classes. So this is a situation where you can appeal and argue to TennCare that actually, to maintain Mary's progress and maintain her abilities, she needs more intense speech therapy. So in fact, it is medically necessary to get speech therapy more frequently. So this is the type of situation where you're disputing TennCare's decision, or in this case, you're going to argue to TennCare that Mary needs speech therapy more intensely than once a month, and TennCare is going to then make a decision that will be place a requirement on the school to offer speech therapy more than once a month. So this is not a decision by TennCare, but TennCare can kind of intervene and make sure that the school system provides speech therapy more often than it has said that it will. So TennCare can make a decision or can intervene on a decision in the case of Mary's speech therapy. So that's it for appeals. I went through some of that fairly quickly. So if there are any questions, please, you can share them with Asia and I.
All right, and also, sorry, I'm trying to get back to the beginning. I saw that there were some questions in the chat, so I'm just gonna go ahead and answer those, but feel free to keep dropping questions should any come up for you. All right, so the first question is coverage available to children who've turned 19? So to clarify, actually I'll go to the slides, that would be helpful. So for a child who, for most of the eligibility categories, a child is eligible up until they turn 19. So what's going to happen is they'll be covered, and then at or around their 19th birthday, TennCare is going to send a notice to the family saying that you're being disenrolled. And that's due to them aging out. The only exception is for child medically needy or medically needy spend down. Again, those are the same category. That goes up to age 21. So that means that at or around the child's 21st birthday, they'll receive that termination notice. So it's really just another way of saying kids 18 and below qualify, but the way that TennCare words it in its policy manual is up to a child's 19th birthday. So hopefully that makes more sense. All right, and then the treatment. So I actually went back in the slides while Jane was talking, and I think I actually had a typo, so that's my fault. Treatment is not just about screenings. They are in fact required to treat whatever was found during the screenings. I think I just had a typo there. So thank you for catching that. Yes, TennCare is required to pay for an actual treatment. They can't just keep screening. All right, and then the next question was about green card holders and the 5-year bar. So kids do have to wait out that 5-year bar. There are some exceptions. For example, if you are an asylum seeker, you're not held to that 5-year bar. But the key is that you had to have actually been granted asylum. Some people will apply for asylum and then try and get TennCare, and that's not sufficient. And unfortunately, the asylum application process takes a very long time in the United States. So more than likely, a child is going to have that LPR status, that lawful permanent resident status, for at least 5 years. There are few exceptions, but again, there's going to be some sort of waiting period between when they arrive in the United States and when they can receive care. All right. Yes, you all will receive a copy of the slides. Yes, I will put our contact info back on the screen. There you go. So other trainings that are coming up will be included in the follow-up email. If we have other trainings or events, those will all be in the follow-up email, along with the recording of this webinar and the webinar slides. All right, I think that covers everything that's been in the Q&A box so far. We can stay on for a few more minutes in case anybody else has any questions that pop up. But other than that, you all are free to go. Thank you so much for joining us, and check those emails for a follow-up about this webinar. All right, we have another question. If a family doesn't know which would fit best for them, could they contact you or who to discuss? Yes, definitely. If you have a child who is currently insured, but whatever plan that is not sufficient, or if they're uninsured, or you just have any general questions about TennCare, definitely call us. We are always accepting cases with kids coverage. Sometimes we may have to modify intake for other beneficiaries, but we're always looking to help kids get insured. So definitely give us a call. All right, to the few of you who are still on, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to hop off now, but I hope you all have a great rest of your day.